They don't blink, they don't breathe, but somehow, they watch. On the side of a forgotten highway stands a roadside museum filled with wax figures and mannequins that feel far too real. Their lifeless stares hide something darker, something that pulses beneath the plastic surface. Tourist Trap 1979 wasn't just another low-budget horror film. It was a fever dream stitched together from psychological dread, technical improvisation, and budgetary collapse. Directed by David Schmoller and backed surprisingly by producer Charles Band, this film wasn't meant to become iconic, yet it wormed its way into the nightmares of an entire generation and quietly influenced a decade of slashers that followed. From eerie puppetry to unexplained production accidents, Tourist Trap is a case study in how limitation can breed lasting terror. The cast, often left in the dark, literally and figuratively, reacted to practical effects in real time. What you see on screen isn't always acting. Stephen King once named it one of his favorite horror films, but the real question is, why? What was it about this oddball, underfunded flick that etched itself into the DNA of horror? Why do so many modern directors whisper its name with reverence, yet audiences barely remember it existed? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Tourist Trap 1979. Fact 1. The mannequins were never meant to move. It started with a still smile and hollow eyes. The mannequins weren't supposed to move, at least, not like that. When Tourist Trap began production, the crew had only a few lifeless props salvaged from old store displays. Most couldn't articulate. Yet director David Schmoller insisted they had to come alive in ways no dummy ever had on film. With no budget for animatronics, effects artist Richard O'Brien resorted to a mix of fishing lines, compressed air, and sleight-of-hand camera tricks to make the mannequins jerk, blink, and tremble. The low-tech solution birthed an unexpected result: movements that were stilted, offbeat, and deeply unsettling. Some figures twitched at odd intervals, others rotated their heads a beat too slowly. Schmoller embraced the flaws, saying the imperfections made them feel wrong in the right way. Even actors were creeped out. Tanya Roberts later admitted that she refused to be left alone on set during the night shoots because she swore the mannequins shifted when no one touched them. And here's the irony. Those amateur rigging hacks never meant to hold up under scrutiny became the signature visual language of the film. So what's more terrifying, a perfectly moving puppet or one that moves just enough to feel sentient? Fact 2. The budget collapse made it better. The original script for Tourist Trap included full-scale action sequences, explosive telekinetic standoffs, and complex set pieces. None of that happened. Halfway through pre-production, funding was slashed. The producers lost a major investor, and suddenly Schmoller's vision had to be cut in half, both in page count and in spectacle. The elaborate finale? Gone. The chase sequences? Minimized. In their place, long, claustrophobic tracking shots inside dark rooms filled with motionless mannequins, and that accidental shift changed everything. The film leaned into atmosphere over action. The sound design became critical. Audiences were made to sit in silence, watching almost nothing, only for a sudden twitch or whisper to puncture the calm. Critics at the time panned it for being too slow or too weird. But that same uncomfortable pacing would later be praised by filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro and Mike Flanagan, who cite Tourist Trap as a lesson in how absence can become a weapon. The tight budget stripped away the noise, leaving behind only stillness, dread, and the possibility that something in the room might be alive. Sometimes, when a film loses everything, it finds what truly scares us. Fact 3. The telekinesis was real, sort of. When objects start flying in Tourist Trap, you might assume it's done with basic visual effects, but the truth is far stranger. The film's telekinesis scenes weren't enhanced with optical tricks or post-production overlays. Instead, most of them were achieved live, on set, in real time. Assistant director Robert A. Burns rigged practical effects using hidden strings, air pumps, and even magnets embedded in furniture. Props would shoot across the room, windows would slam shut, and mannequins would shake, all with actors unaware of the exact timing. This led to genuine reactions on screen. In one key moment, actress Jocelyn Jones was so startled by a flying lamp that she broke character, and Schmoller kept the take. The decision to film everything in camera created a visceral texture. The stunts felt rough, unpredictable, and slightly off-kilter. That lack of polish became the film's unintentional strength, but it wasn't without cost. Burns later recalled that one of the flying doors nearly hit an actor in the head. The crew joked that the ghosts of the set didn't know their mark. And here's the question horror fans still ask today. If the terror came from effects done right in front of the lens, does that make it more real than any CGI nightmare? Fact 4. Stephen King was obsessed. When Stephen King published his personal list of favorite horror films, there was a peculiar outlier. Nestled among The Exorcist, Alien, and Psycho was Tourist Trap. He didn't just like it, he championed it. In interviews, King described the film as weirdly haunting and praised its sense of lurking madness. For a movie that barely scraped by in theaters and was panned by mainstream critics, the endorsement was unexpected and powerful. King later claimed the movie influenced how he wrote supernatural elements in his own work. Some fans even draw parallels between Tourist Trap and Carrie, noting the way telekinesis is used as both a narrative device and a metaphor for repression and rage. But why this film? According to King, it wasn't just the killer or the effects, it was the tone. That dreamlike unease, the sense that the movie itself was unstable, as if it might dissolve into madness at any second. His praise brought the film new life. VHS rentals surged in the 80 seconds, and horror fanzines started referencing it as a hidden blueprint for modern psychological horror. So here's the paradox. How does a forgotten B-movie become sacred to the king of horror? Fact 5. The set was built from abandoned trash. The uncanny atmosphere of Tourist Trap didn't come from studio design, it came from literal junk. Art director Robert A. Burns scoured junkyards, flea markets, and derelict buildings to find the film's set pieces. The mannequins were pulled from closed department stores, the wallpaper was rotting scrap. Even the wax museum itself was built using scavenged wood, broken plaster, and mismatched decor from rural roadside attractions. This gave the movie an unpolished, almost found footage aesthetic. Nothing matched, and everything looked slightly wrong, like stepping into someone's nightmare of a museum rather than a real location. Burns, who had previously worked on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, deliberately avoided symmetry and coherence. He filled every frame with visual noise, peeling walls, chipped paint, statues with missing eyes to keep the viewer visually disoriented. Actors reportedly tripped over unstable props. One mannequin's head fell off mid-scene and had to be reattached with chewing gum. Schmoller kept the chaos, calling it perfectly imperfect. And it worked. Viewers couldn't quite tell where the set ended and the horror began. When your set feels like a hallucination, who needs special effects? Fact 6. A lost subplot hinted at a second killer. There's something missing from Tourist Trap, and it's not an accident. Early drafts of the script featured a second antagonist, a female accomplice to Mr. Slauson, who helped lure victims into the mannequin museum. She was described as almost mechanical in how she moved, with ambiguous lines hinting she might be one of the creations herself. Multiple scenes were written, and at least one was shot featuring this eerie figure, speaking to Slauson in hushed tones, seemingly arguing over who gets to keep the new ones. But due to runtime constraints and tonal confusion, the subplot was cut entirely. Still, traces remain. A lingering close-up of a mannequin with a cracked porcelain face, a line from Slauson about not being alone, and a strange moment where a character hears two sets of footsteps but sees no one. Fans have speculated ever since. Was she real? Was she a living doll? Was Slauson ever truly alone in that house? The film never answers, and that silence might be the most disturbing part. Sometimes what a movie doesn't show is more terrifying than what it does. That blank, glossy face with painted-on lips, it wasn't just a prop. The porcelain-like mask worn by Mr. Slauson's murderous alter ego wasn't a random design. According to behind-the-scenes reports, the crew based it on the facial structure of an actual local actress who had auditioned for a different role. Schmoller and Burns were captivated by her symmetrical features and emotionless screen presence. She didn't get the part, but her face was immortalized in plastic. The mold was taken without telling her. The team created a distorted, genderless version of her likeness, smoothing out human imperfections until it sat firmly in the uncanny valley. During filming, crew members admitted they started avoiding the mask between takes. One grip reportedly covered it with a cloth whenever possible, saying it stared even when no one was inside. When the actress eventually visited the set months later and saw the mask, she was stunned. Her only words, "Why does it look like it's trying to forget me?" When a killer wears the face of a stranger, it's creepy, but when he wears your face, it's personal. Fact 8. The composer used toy instruments. That eerie score? It wasn't written on a grand piano. It came from a child's toy box. Composer Pino Donaggio was initially approached, but budget constraints forced the team to hire composer Andre Caplet, who worked under a pseudonym. To match the surreal, warped tone of the film and to save money, he experimented with toy xylophones, music boxes, detuned ukuleles, and even a plastic recorder meant for kindergartners. The result was a soundtrack that felt both whimsical and diseased, melodies twisted upward, then collapsed on themselves, notes bent out of tune just slightly. Familiar lullaby motifs morphed into something untrustworthy. One sequence features a music box that slows down mid-spin, producing a decaying melody that plays as a mannequin turns its head. That sound wasn't edited, it happened naturally due to the mechanism failing on set. The team loved it and kept it in. Today, horror composers cite the Tourist Trap score as a hidden gem, proof that dissonance and discomfort don't require an orchestra. Sometimes, the most terrifying music comes from the toys you left behind. Fact 9. Chuck Connors took the role too. Seriously. Chuck Connors, best known as a Western hero, shocked fans by taking the villainous role of Mr. Slauson. But what disturbed the crew was how quickly he vanished into it. Connors insisted on staying in character during breaks, often sitting in the shadows of the wax museum set, speaking only in Slauson's slow, mournful cadence. He refused to rehearse his possessed monologues, claiming they had to come from somewhere darker than practice. At one point, he wandered into a scene that wasn't scheduled and stood silently behind a mannequin for over 5 minutes before anyone noticed. When asked what he was doing, Connors replied, "He told me to wait here." No one was sure who he was. Some crew members began avoiding him entirely, especially after he was caught whispering to mannequins between takes. Director Schmoller said Connors' descent into the role was unexpected and honestly a little unnerving. This method approach gave the character a strange magnetism. Audiences didn't just fear Slauson, they pitied him. But behind the performance was a man who may have blurred the line between acting and obsession. So was Chuck Connors playing a haunted man? Or was he haunted by the man he played? Fact 10. The film was shot without a permit. That desolate stretch of highway, the creaking old house, the silent hills surrounding it, none of it was cleared. Due to severe budget constraints, parts of Tourist Trap were filmed guerrilla style without official permits. The location was a partially abandoned ranch outside Los Angeles, and the crew was technically trespassing during several late-night shoots. Lighting rigs were set up in the dark, and actors were instructed to stay low if they heard a car approaching. One scene had to be reshot 3 times after a local farmer interrupted, shotgun in hand, asking what was crawling around his land. Despite the risk, these limitations gave the film its eerie realism. The creaks, wind, and background noise weren't Foley, they were real. In one instance, a wild coyote howled during a take, and the sound was left in to amplify the dread. The production team never admitted to the trespassing until years later, during a horror convention Q&A. Their reasoning? If the authorities had caught us, at least it'd be a scary story. And maybe that's what makes the terror so believable. You're not just watching something forbidden, you're watching something that wasn't supposed to exist. Fact 11. The wax figures were real people. Sometimes. Not every mannequin in Tourist Trap was made of plastic. Some were flesh and blood. To save time and money, Schmoller hired actors to stand perfectly still in scenes where mannequins filled the frame. At least 5 background figures are actually humans holding their breath and locking their muscles. One extra even wore a full face mask and body paint for an extended tracking shot lasting over 30 seconds. The effect was subtle but powerful. Viewers reported moments where they were certain a prop had just blinked or twitched, and they were right. The camera would slowly pan past figures that shouldn't move, and the viewer's brain would struggle to reconcile what it saw. The technique created a constant sense of unease. Every mannequin became a potential threat. Every motionless face might suddenly come to life. Modern horror films have borrowed this trick, often think Insidious, The Conjuring, even Hereditary. But Tourist Trap did it first. In a room full of statues, the most terrifying thing is the one pretending not to breathe. Fact 12. The studio wanted to market it to teens. At its core, Tourist Trap is a bleak, surreal, and disturbing film. But the studio had other ideas. Charles Band's distribution company initially tried to pitch the movie as a fun teen slasher in the vein of Friday the 13th. Posters were redesigned with bright reds and exaggerated taglines like, "They'll make a dummy out of you." Trailers used upbeat narration and cut out most of the film's disturbing imagery. Schmoller was furious. He argued that the film was never meant to be popcorn horror. It was psychological and strange, more Carnival of Souls than Sleepaway Camp. The clash between artistic vision and marketing pressure led to a confusing rollout. Some theaters pulled the film after opening weekend, claiming it was too disturbing for its own demographic. Others mistakenly billed it as a comedy, horror. The film failed at the box office, but its cult following grew not in theaters but in VHS aisles, late-night cable screenings, and whispered recommendations. because Tourist Trap was never really for teenagers. It was for those who understood that horror is supposed to feel wrong. Fact 13. Tanya Roberts was almost recast after day one. She would go on to become a cult icon, but Tanya Roberts nearly didn't survive her first day on set. Roberts, who played one of the doomed friends in Tourist Trap, arrived late to the production, having been cast only a few days before shooting. On her first day, she reportedly clashed with the assistant director over blocking and refused to enter the main set, saying it gave her a headache that felt like a warning. Schmoller, under stress from the studio and behind schedule, considered recasting, but Chuck Connors of all people intervened. He pulled Roberts aside, spoke with her privately, and after that conversation, she returned to set and never complained again. The details of that conversation remain unknown. Roberts later joked in interviews that Connors had scared her straight, but others suspected it was more than intimidation, it was understanding. In the end, Roberts gave one of the film's most vulnerable performances. Her scenes, especially the silent moments, carry a raw edge that feels less like acting and more like surrender, and maybe that's why her role works, because she didn't feel safe, not even when the cameras weren't rolling. Fact 14. The final scene was improvised on the spot. The last shot of Tourist Trap is haunting. A lone survivor driving away, mannequins propped in the car, frozen in smiles. It wasn't in the script. Originally, the film was supposed to end with a traditional final girl escape, no surrealism, no lingering madness. But on the last day of shooting, Schmoller wasn't satisfied. He wanted one more image, one that suggested the horror hadn't ended, but had spread. The crew scrambled. They borrowed mannequins from earlier scenes, dressed them in the outfits of dead characters, and placed them in a car. The actress was told to drive slowly, don't speak, and just exist. That single scene, captured in one take, became the film's punctuation mark. It left viewers unsettled and confused. Was she alive? Was she broken? Had she become part of Slausen's collection emotionally, if not physically? Years later, Schmoller admitted the scene wasn't supposed to make sense. It was meant to leave you with a question, not an answer. And sometimes, a question is more powerful than closure. Fact 15. The film was nearly rated X. It wasn't the violence, it wasn't the nudity, it was the tone. When Tourist Trap was submitted to the MPAA, they nearly slapped it with an X rating, not for content, but for pervasive psychological disturbance. The board cited sequences involving mannequins screaming, characters gasping without mouths, and the extended sound of moaning wood as prolonged traumatic elements. Schmoller and the producers were stunned. They had expected an R. Instead, they were told to cut or soften key scenes. Rather than alter the visuals, the crew adjusted sound design, lowering certain shrieks, trimming echo effects, and removing a slow-motion shot of a mannequin melting. It worked. The film secured an R rating, but the MPAA's reaction said something the filmmakers already suspected. Tourist Trap was more disturbing than it appeared on paper, because the horror wasn't in what was shown. It was in what lingered. When a film nearly earns an X, not for what it shows, but for how it feels, you know it struck a nerve. Fact 16. One crew member quit after hearing a voice. It wasn't on the call sheet. It wasn't part of the effects. But something or someone spoke. During a night shoot inside the Wax Museum set, a lighting technician was adjusting gels when he suddenly froze. He later told the assistant director that he heard a child's voice whisper his name twice. The building was empty except for the skeleton crew, and no children were involved in production. Initially dismissed as stress or exhaustion, the incident took a turn when a second crew member reported hearing giggling in the same hallway. Then a boom mic operator refused to work inside the building unless someone stood behind him at all times. The technician who first heard the voice quit the next morning and didn't return. When asked why, he simply said, "Something in that place knows my name." The cast wasn't told until weeks later, but once they were, some insisted on group walkthroughs of the set before each night shoot. The producers never acknowledged it publicly, but those who worked on the film say the atmosphere wasn't just creepy, it was charged. So the question remains, was the horror confined to the script, or did the set absorb it? Fact 17. The original title was The Sideshow. Before it was Tourist Trap, the film had a very different name and a different identity. The working title during early development was The Sideshow, meant to evoke images of carnivals, freak shows, and abandoned roadside attractions. But as the script evolved and leaned more into psychological horror, Schmoller felt the name lacked menace. Still, some remnants of the carnival concept remain. The mannequins were originally meant to resemble sideshow performers, bearded ladies, contortionists, and living skeletons. A few of these props made it into background scenes but were downplayed to keep the tone grounded. The shift in title wasn't just cosmetic. It redefined the film's themes, from spectacle to trap, from entertainment to entrapment, and it fit. The film wasn't about a place of wonder, it was about the illusion of safety, a roadside attraction that lures you in, then never lets you leave. Sometimes, changing a name changes the entire nightmare. Fact 18. No one knows who built the main set. The Wax Museum, the heart of Tourist Trap, was constructed before the film secured full financing. But here's the strange part. No one seems to remember who built it. Schmoller credited production designer Robert A. Burns for the concept, but Burns later claimed he wasn't responsible for the physical construction. A subcontractor was supposedly hired for the carpentry, but no paperwork exists. Crew logs show no record of delivery dates. Even prop master notes list the museum interior as pre-installed. This led to rumors that the structure was already standing, a leftover from a failed roadside attraction that the crew repurposed. Others insist it was assembled hastily by a non-union team working off the books. Whatever the truth, the building had a strange presence. Several cast members said it didn't feel like a set. One described it as already haunted before we ever shot a frame. To this day, no one's been able to confirm what happened to it after filming wrapped. It appeared, it served its purpose, and then it vanished, like something that was never meant to be remembered. Fact 19. The mannequin with no eyes was banned from TV. There's one shot less than 3 seconds long that several TV networks refuse to air. It features a close-up of a mannequin with no eyes, its sockets carved out unevenly as it lets out a breathy moan. The effect was subtle, but terrifying. The face was modeled after a real person, then warped in post-production to exaggerate asymmetry. When Tourist Trap aired on syndicated late-night television in the early 80 seconds, several stations cut the shot entirely, citing graphic psychological disturbance. The issue wasn't gore, it was implication. Viewers complained about feeling physically sick or followed after the scene. One letter read, "That thing looked like it was still thinking." The networks didn't officially ban it, but they avoided it. Reruns were edited. TV guides warned of intense surreal imagery. The team behind the film took it as a badge of honor. "We didn't need blood," Schmoller said. "We needed to unsettle your soul." So here's the question. When a face with no eyes can still haunt you, what exactly are you afraid of seeing? Fact 20. The whole film may be a delusion. At first glance, Tourist Trap is a straightforward slasher with supernatural touches. But some believe none of it ever happened. A popular fan theory suggests that the entire story unfolds inside Slouson's mind during the final moments before death. Clues include shifting timelines, characters who vanish without consequence, and dialogue that loops unnaturally. One particularly eerie sign, the wax figures mirror the exact expressions of the victims before they die, implying foreknowledge or hallucination. Supporters of the theory point to the film's structure. No true origin is given for Slouson's powers, no outside world interferes, and the final survivor seems less like a person and more like a symbol. Schmoller has never confirmed or denied this reading. When asked, he replied, "It's a film about a trap, and sometimes the trap is the mind." So what if the mannequins were never alive? Because no one in the story was real to begin with. Bonus fact, the film is still playing, somewhere. It's been decades since Tourist Trap hit theaters. Most prints have vanished, the set is gone, the cast has moved on. And yet, reports keep coming in. Across rural America, stories circulate of strange midnight screenings, projectors flickering to life in forgotten drive-ins or dusty back rooms of video stores long closed. In some cases, the film isn't listed on the marquee, it just plays, unscheduled, unannounced. What's stranger, the cut is always slightly different. A few extra seconds here, a new mannequin in the background, a voice on the soundtrack that wasn't there before. Some viewers recall hearing their own name whispered faintly beneath the score. One urban legend speaks of a version where Slauson looks directly into the camera during the final scene, something that never appeared in any official release. When challenged, those who saw it insist they're not mistaken. "He watched me," one man said. "Not the audience. Me." No one's found a master reel. No studio admits to alternate versions, but every so often, a warped VHS copy surfaces label faded, timecode missing. So if you ever find yourself alone in a small-town video store and Tourist Trap is playing quietly in the back, ask yourself, are you watching the film or is it watching you? Which fact twisted your perception the most? The real telekinesis, the mannequin with your face, or the film that might not have happened at all? Tell us in the comments what creeped you out or what theory you believe explains the madness best. And if you know a film that's even stranger than this one, we want to hear about it. Subscribe for more forgotten horrors, fractured realities, and stories that were never supposed to surface.